Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is a debate on motion number S4M06492 in the name of Angela Constance on young people supporting Scotland's economy today and tomorrow. I now call, can I ask members who wish to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, please? And I call on Angela Constance to speak to and move the motion. Minister, you have 14 minutes to do so.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's economy needs the energy, fresh ideas and skills of the young to remain competitive. Young people are absolutely essential to our economy, both today and tomorrow. Now, Now, the monthly and quarterly publication cycle of the various labour market surveys give politicians, economists and media commentators much to consider. But although statistics are always subject to interpretation and qualification, no matter how you choose to interpret recent figures, the following is true. Youth unemployment in Scotland dropped in each of the last 5 months, and the latest annual population survey figures show a decrease in 2012 compared to 2011. Scotland's youth unemployment rate is lower than the UK average and each of the other home nations. And only 5 countries in the EU have a lower youth unemployment rate than Scotland, and that's Germany, Austria, Netherlands, Malta and Denmark. So the relentless efforts across Scotland from councils, employers, voluntary organisations and others are a testimony to our call for an all-Scotland approach to tackling youth unemployment, and these efforts are making a difference and need to continue. Now, although the recent downward trends in youth unemployment rate and level is welcome, there are still 65,000 young people in Scotland who want to work but have not been able to secure employment. And for young people in work, underemployment is a growing concern. Last week's research paper from Professors David Bell and David Blanchflower remind us that underemployment is particularly concentrated among the young, and that last year 30% of 16 to 24-year-olds who had jobs wanted longer hours. And this adds to the challenges faced by young people in today's labour market. And I welcome the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee's report on underemployment published last month, which the Government will respond to very soon. And while there has been a welcome decrease in the headline youth unemployment figures, the increase in long-term joblessness amongst young people is indeed worrying. Schemes to support these young people, like the wage incentives of the Youth Contract and the Work Programme, are the responsibility of the UK Government. And it's a source of deep frustration to me that I can't be confident that these young people are receiving the support they need, and that we are not able to adapt these resources to better support young people in danger of being trapped in a cycle of long-term unemployment. The latest youth employment report from the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development is called "Employers are from Mars, Young People are from Venus." And this is based on research with employers. It highlights a mismatch between employers' expectations of young people during the recruitment process and young people's understanding of what is expected of them. On the one hand, many young people are struggling to find their first job. On the other, some employers are finding it hard to get the skills that they need. And we need to address this mismatch to reduce youth unemployment and ensure that businesses are equipped with the right talent for their immediate and future needs. And making young people our business means changing the way that we do business. For employers, this includes acknowledging what young employees bring to the workplace and adapting their recruitment methods so that they don't act against young people. And for young people, this means gaining the skills valuable to employers and demonstrating how they can put these into practice. For government and others who support young people and employers, we need to help young people and employers understand each other. And we are making good progress on each of these fronts. Last month, Gordon MacDonald MSP hosted a parliamentary reception with third sector employers and young people, supported by our successful Community Jobs programme. Over 3,000 young people have had a high-quality work-based training opportunities through Community Jobs Scotland in the past 3 years. And the young people and employers at that reception were definitely on the same planet, understanding how to support each other's aims. Last week at Cumbernauld College, I presented a number of young people with the new Certificate of Work Readiness. And what's different about this qualification is that half of the time required to complete it, around 190 hours, needs to be spent in the workplace and assessed by the employer. Endorsed by business organisations like the Scottish Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Small Businesses, as well as by employers like Diageo, Scottish Power and Burn Stewart Distilleries. And achieving the certificate will help young people prove that they are ready for the world of work. The reforms underway in the college sector will ensure that the skills people develop at college help grow the economy. And regional colleges and outcome agreements will make it easier for employers to influence learning provision. And the Commission on Developing Scotland's young workforce, led by Sir Ian Wood, will advise us on what further improvements might be needed to our education and training system to make it even more responsive to the needs of the economy. Presiding Officer, I want more employers to accept the business case for investing in young people and to look at how they can create new youth jobs, offer apprenticeships or offer high-quality work experience for young people. This is a big ask, but I know there is a large appetite amongst employers to respond. In return, through modernising our career service, preparing young people better to make that move from education into work, and making our education and skills system more responsive to industry needs, we will help ensure that their workforce needs are better met. And responding to the needs of key growth sectors, we are providing a wider and better mix of skills provision. One example of this is the Energy Skills Action Plan, which has led to significant collaboration with industry, Scotland's colleges and universities, as well as other key delivery partners. And since 2010, the Low Carbon Skills Fund has provided over 2,000 training places for small businesses across Scotland. Last year, we supported a further 1,000 flexible training places in energy and low carbon by continuing this fund and introducing the new Energy Skills Challenge Fund. In addition, 500 modern apprenticeship places a year have been ring-fenced for the sector. And my world of work, includes a specific energy section which has attracted 5,000 hits in 18 months, helping to attract young people to the sector. And initiatives like CareerWise will improve collaboration between schools and businesses and encourage more girls into science and engineering careers. And as well as making our education and skills system more responsive to industry, we are supporting businesses to develop their own solutions to meet workforce needs. For example, the NIG Skills Academy will provide general training for 3,000 by 2015. And building on all of this, the Scottish Energy Skills Academy will support our existing business base and attract further energy investment in Scotland. Presiding Officer, our approach to tackling youth unemployment, I believe, is more in tune with the European countries that are introducing youth guarantees than with the UK Government. We agree with intervening early to prevent young people becoming unemployed in the first place. Yes, of course.
Liam MacArthur.
Very grateful to the Minister for taking the intervention. While I wouldn't disagree with very much of what she said at all, the contrast she's appearing to draw between the approach of the Scottish Government and the approach of the UK Government strikes me as slightly odd, given the £1 billion of funding for the youth contract, which is available to employers in Scotland, and indeed I think mirrors the approach that is taking place in Germany, which she acknowledges has been very, very successful in tackling youth unemployment.
Minister.
I hope Mr MacArthur is fully aware of the European Youth Guarantee, which the European Commission proposed, and that there is a political agreement amongst Member States, although both only the UK Government and the Czech Republic have exercised their right or declined to participate in the European Youth Guarantee. The European Youth Guarantee is about intervening early. It's about not waiting until young people are long-term unemployed or claiming job seekers' allowance for 6, 12 or 18 months. It's about giving a guarantee of work, apprenticeship, education or training to every 16 to 24-year-old, or in European cases 15 to 25-year-olds, who become unemployed either within 4 months of leaving education or within 4 months of becoming unemployed. And I think that's a very progressive, significant commitment that we should be implementing in this country. And I've discussed the European Youth Guarantee with UK Government ministers. I regret that they are not convinced by it. They do seem to object to Europe coming up with these proposals in the first place. But we all know of the challenge of rising youth unemployment across Europe, other than with the exception of the countries I mentioned earlier. And I would hope that Mr MacArthur, if he would go away and look at the European Youth Guarantee, I know Liberals are often very pro-European, that may be something that he could persuade his coalition partners in the Westminster Government on something to think again. Presiding Officer, employment services are absolutely central to implementing such a European Youth Guarantee. And although this government, we don't have the necessary powers over these, we are doing everything we can to make progress. For example, in education, we've prioritised college places and supported more higher education places for young people. And we are offering high-quality paid traineeships, work experience opportunities through, for example, as I've already mentioned, the Certificate of Work Readiness and Community Jobs Scotland. And we do continue to achieve our target of 25,000 new modern apprenticeships each year, with 77% of last year's modern apprenticeship starts being taken up by 16 to 24-year-olds. And we will announce very soon a package of financial support to businesses to help them create 10,000 jobs for young people. And I will continue to look at how other countries in Europe and elsewhere are tackling youth unemployment and to learn from that good practice. And I would certainly be glad to share that with Parliament, because it's very important that we look at what others are doing and at the impact of the actions, as well as our own actions, the actions that other countries are taking as well. Next week, I'll join other European youth ministers at the Education and Youth Council while I'm in Brussels, and I'll meet the rapporteur leading the European Parliament's Employment and Social Affairs Committee Youth Unemployment Report. Presiding Officer, last month The Economist painted a bleak picture for young people across the planet, with 75 million young people unemployed and youth unemployment rates in Spain and Greece racing towards 60%. And it's not surprising that the article was called Generation Jobless. However, despite the negative headline, the article finished on a more hopeful note, acknowledging that governments are trying to address the mismatch between education and the labour market, and that companies are beginning to take more responsibility for investing in the young. And our focus, Presiding Officer, should not just be on avoiding a lost generation. Our efforts need to be about helping young Scots to be part of an aspiration generation, an ambition generation and an innovation generation, and where all our young people are encouraged and nurtured to play a full and productive role in Scotland's economy, both today and tomorrow. And with all that in mind, Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much. I now call on Ken Macintosh to speak to and move Amendment S4M 06492.2. And I should say we do have a bit of time in hand at the moment for interventions.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, when my colleagues and I saw the terms of the motion for debate today, we were torn about whether or not to offer our support. On the one hand, as you can imagine, all of us in the Labour Party do welcome the opportunity to keep employment at the top of the political agenda, not just because of the damaging effect that unemployment has on individuals and their families, but also because of its divisive effect on society as a whole. And of course, the flip side of that argument is that by creating or working towards a full employment society, not only do we rebuild the self-esteem of those very individuals, but we actually increase the prosperity of our whole society and improve our national well-being. It is the way to tackle so many of the problems that ail our country. But the downside of the motion, of course, is that it reads in a rather self-congratulatory style. It's a weakness that I believe all governments are prone to. There is a risk here that the Scottish Government has latched onto one good set of quarterly employment figures and read into them perhaps more than they should. I believe everybody dealing with statistics is always advised to look at the long-term trend, not to overreact to one set of figures, particularly if they look anomalous and therefore should be treated with caution. What most worried some of my Labour colleagues and...
Minister.
Grateful to Mr McIntosh. I, of course, appreciate the complexity of labour market statistics and they do have to be understood and studied very carefully. But I wonder if he would acknowledge with me that the quarterly and monthly statistics for the last 5 monthly releases have shown a downward trend in youth unemployment in Scotland.
Ken McIntosh.
Indeed they do. And the Minister will be well aware of the caution that we should treat all figures with, but there is a clear trend. I was just worried about taking the 29,000 figure in this particular motion. But, Minister, if the Minister bears with me, I'll go on to expand on my comments. What worries me is that the Minister may infer, and she hasn't done it in the motion today, but did so in the answer to my question last week, is that somehow this drop in unemployment is directly due to actions taken by her government, rather than the cumulative effect of a number of factors, and I'll return to that point later. But, if I may say so, on balance, we agreed that any drop in unemployment is welcome, even if we're not entirely sure what is behind the fall. And similarly, the employability measures which the government has outlined today, although by themselves not necessarily transformative, are still to be welcomed. I'll return to this point too later, as we have now had several debates on employability. Employability measures are important, but when the problem with our economy is employment, not employability, we must be careful not to put the problem back onto individuals and to blame them for their misfortune. So I make these remarks partially to put my contribution in context, partially, if I may say so, to appease what I would call the paranoid tendency on the SNP front and back benches, who I suspect assume that Labour starts every debate on the basis that we're trying to prove the SNP wrong no matter what they say. I can assure you that is not the case. I see the paranoid tendency has just woken up. We simply wish to test what policies are working and which are not. So, if I may also put the unemployment statistics in context, yes, we do welcome the fall in the most recent employment figures, but it is interesting to note that last month's, the fall in one set of figures last month was unfortunately offset by another increase in the number of long-term unemployed, particularly in long-term youth unemployment. Now, I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone here, let alone the Minister, of the scarring effect that a prolonged period of unemployment can have on people when they are young. I believe it is equally sobering to look at the performance of the Scottish economy in terms of employment and unemployment over the past 4 or 5 years, over the course of this recession, because between 2008 and 2012, Scotland experienced a fall in employment significantly worse than in other regions across or within the UK. Similarly, Scotland's growth in unemployment over that same period was far greater than in any other UK region, with only Northern Ireland coming close to the problem and the levels we're experiencing here. If we similarly look at economic inactivity, we can see that levels have increased in Scotland, whereas they've actually reduced across the UK. Mr Mackenzie.
Mike Mackenzie.
The Scottish Government is due no credit when the statistics look quite good, and due blame when the statistics are bad. Surely you can't have it both ways.
Ken McIntosh.
No, I'm certainly not making that point whatsoever. I'm just trying to. I thought I was explaining myself quite well. That I'm trying not to blame the government. Similarly, I am also anxious that the government don't take praise where it's not due. I think it's very difficult to see evidence. It's very difficult to see evidence for the interventions the government has made that have actually made a difference. And just the way the government expresses itself, just yesterday, take yesterday, the Scottish Government put out a press release and it headlined on new sets of statistics showing that youth employment was down again. it didn't highlight the 33,000 16 to 19-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training. And that's an increase of 1,000 in a year, which was also contained in those figures. Now, Stephen Boyd from the STUC has provided an excellent analysis of the government's claims that youth employment has fallen by a third. And he highlights in his analysis that within those figures there is a very worrying increase in unemployment amongst 16 to 17-year-olds, much higher, in fact, than in the rest of the UK. So my point, the point that Stephen Boyd makes, and that I would repeat here, is that if the Scottish Government wish to take the credit when things are going well, then they clearly also need to take responsibility when the figures do not reflect so well in them, and when they tell a different story.
Minister.
I think actually that the strength of our policies are in our offer to 16 to 19-year-olds. And I always read very closely blogs by Stephen Boyd and the STUC, and they're usually always very well informed. Where I would take issue on this occasion is, in terms of the labour force survey, that the cohort of 16 to 17-year-olds is really so small, whereas if you look at the annual population survey, you have a larger cohort, and actually unemployment in amongst 16 and 17-year-olds is actually fallen.
Ken McIntosh.
Well, that would be a good point. I didn't actually want to go into the difference between the annual survey and the labour force survey, because the Minister's own motion, your very own motion, actually comes from the labour force survey. I wasn't going to raise that as a point, but you've now raised it as an example against it. I mean, the labour force survey, Presiding Officer, just for information, these figures actually have to have the words experimental added next to them when they're quoted. So I'm not trying to do the trend down. I just think that we should be wary, and that the whole picture is not a rosy one. And this is the difficulty. We are not in a period where we could either relax or for that matter, take credit and assume that everything that the government is doing is working, because there's very little evidence to show that it is working. It's difficult to know what is making the difference. Now, and I can assure everyone on the backbenches in SNP that I want Scotland to outperform the UK across every measure. I have no wish to see the Scottish Government fail in these measures. I wish Scotland to do better. It's simply that we need to know the facts. We want to work out what interventions work, what doesn't. What more can we do? What is it that's paying dividends for the government, the private sector or the third sector? It's clear, for example, that the world is suffering from an economic downturn. Europe still has its own difficulties. The UK economy, and if I may make some common ground with the SNP backbenches, perhaps not with the Conservatives and Liberals here, but hopefully we can agree that we're also suffering from the wrong-headed austerity approach of George Osborne and the Tories. So there's... Yes, I'll give way.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I hope to find common ground too. In terms of the wrong-headed austerity measures that are being implemented by the Conservative-Liberal coalition in Westminster, does Mr McIntosh not think, like I do, that it would be better if we had all of the levers of power to actually come up with different policies which would help our young people and the others in our population back to work?
Ken McIntosh.
Well, I was offering consensus. I'm not sure it was responded to. No, clearly I don't agree. In fact, the interesting thing is that the Yes campaign don't seem to agree either, because half the Yes campaign do want control of some of the levers of power, and half of you want to give the power back to Westminster, have no control over it whatsoever. I've never quite understood that. The control of the levers of power, but actually will give the control to the Westminster Government and the Bank of England. That's a bizarre policy, if I may be put that way. But there is some points we can agree on, and the backdrop against which we are asking the Government to intervene. In fact, in some ways, what I'm asking is that the Scottish Government can be more realistic about the difference they can make, perhaps to focus their attention on the measures that are actually making a difference. So, I do welcome the certificates of work readiness. It's one of the focuses of today's debate, and which, by all accounts, it could provide some young people with useful work experience. It's good that we do provide employability at its best. These programmes can give confidence and boost young people's preparedness and their esteem. But we should also recognise, I mentioned this earlier, that there's a downside. The focus on employability can give the impression to too many young people that their lack of employment is their own fault, that their employability is the problem as opposed to the lack of available jobs. And so these programmes should never be seen as an alternative to real and substantial investment in youth unemployment. More concrete action is needed if we are to address this problem, both in the short and the long term. The First Minister was keen to bring up Wales today. And I would just mention in passing that just last week, the Labour administration in Wales announced a £75 million investment package to support jobs and growth in the economy. Now, that's perhaps the sort of measure that I would be more welcoming from the Scottish Government. And we also need to be mindful of some of the decisions which this Government have taken that are actually contrary to the focus on employability. It will actually be detrimental to young people's chances of getting the training they require to enter work. And just the best example, the most obvious example, the Minister may think that cutting further education is an easy target, but £25 million of cuts this year and again next will have a very real impact on the ability of colleges to deliver training and education. It will have a lasting effect on those young people who will miss out on a place at college as a result. I'm conscious of the time, Presiding Officer, so I look forward to discussing what further measures we can take to tackle the very real problems facing young people in Scotland today, and I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Liz Smith. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I put on record at the start that we are very happy to agree with the Scottish Government's motion and also with the Labour motion. Because I think there is a universal acceptance on all sides of the political divide that the economic problems of recent years, both the domestic ones and the international ones, have had a very profound effect on the whole country. But perhaps the greatest impact has been felt by our young people. And whilst the youth unemployment rate in Scotland and the UK as a whole has not reached the exceptionally high levels in some parts of Europe, it does remain too high, and notwithstanding the encouraging signs, and I think we should see them as very encouraging signs amongst the most recent statistics, the unemployment level amongst young people between 16 and 25 is twice as high compared to the unemployment level for the rest of the working population. If we are to ensure that Scotland's economy is stronger in the future, then the onus is on all of us, not only to help boost the jobs market, but better equip our young people with the skills and training that they need and their employers need. Because we need to ensure these skills are more flexible, and we also need to tackle the problem of large numbers of our young people not in any form of employment or training because they are disengaged from education. Mr McIntosh gave us a sharp reminder about the fact that we have the highest proportion of these disengaged groups in the OECD, and that figure has increased significantly in the past decade. Figures from the Scottish Government's own youth unemployment strategy show that failing to move our young people into stable employment can actually cost the economy up to £2 billion. And so we do welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to creating 25,000 apprenticeship places. And we also welcome discussions with the UK Government and the European initiative. I think we have to complement them rather than work against them, because I think whatever we can do in this respect, we need to bring all governments, whether they are in Scotland, Westminster or in Brussels, together. If our young people are to gain employment, then they first must be employable. And this still presents very significant challenges, not least because the skills needs of the workforce of tomorrow are very hard to predict with any degree of certainty. Because we need to accept that the job market is very much more fluid these days, and applicants require a whole host of transferable skills if they are to be wholly successful. We know all too often that employers have expressed very considerable concern about the significant numbers of our school leaders and indeed our graduates who do not possess the right skills to adapt to the workplace. So it was very encouraging last week to see this problem being confronted by Skills Development Scotland and the SQA, who will soon offer a work-ready qualification. And whilst I'm sure there will be some who argue, with some justification I have to say, that this shouldn't be necessary, I think anything which can help put more focus on this problem is to be warmly welcomed. We only need to listen to the Policy Executive of the CBI or to the Scottish Chamber of Commerce just to understand how prevalent that problem is.
Minister.
Grateful. While I appreciate that there are some people that are very far away from the labour market with significant needs, you should not agree with me that in terms of evidence undertaken by the UK Commission on Employability and Skills, who actually found that amongst employers who actually recruit young people, by and large, they're satisfied with their work readiness. What young people lack is experience, and that's just due to their youth.
Liz Smith.
I thank the Minister for that. And just coming to this very point, actually, because those of us, there are some members in the Chamber who were at the cross-party group on colleges and universities today, and they made exactly that point, that In terms of work we looked at Robert Gordon's University, at Napier University, Queen Margaret University, and representation from the colleges, we're making the point that, on the whole, there is an improvement, but there still remains a very significant number, as far as the employers are concerned, who do not feel that young people or the graduates have the right skills for the workplace. And I think that's something that we have to treat very seriously indeed. I think it also comes down to the fact that while the onus of finding, and this is another point that was raised in the cross-party group today, that the onus of finding a work placement sometimes falls very much to the individual person rather than the provision being made by schools, colleges and universities themselves. And there were some wonderful initiatives being talked about this afternoon, and I think if there are models that can breed that success of youngsters not only finding a very suitable placement but being able to find a regular job after that, then I think we have to look at that very seriously. Now, let me say, Deputy Presiding Officer, something about schools, because unquestionably they are the institutions which lay the foundations for work experience. Foremost is the need for good standards of literacy and numeracy. And again, these are too often absent in too many youngsters. By no means all, far from it, but for too many it is a problem. Scotland is not performing nearly well enough, and so may I take the case again. As far as the Curriculum for Excellence is concerned, of which we have very firm support, that can only be part of the process. What we need to do is to ensure that that is complemented by greater rigour of the basic skills, particularly in primary school. These do not work against each other, they are complementary too. And again, I do think that there is a very strong message for us all, and it's a message that's coming through increasingly from colleges and universities on that basis, that these basic skills are lacking in too many cases, and we need to do something about that. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that we are putting forward very positive policy suggestions as to how we make that work, and the Scottish Conservatives will certainly put that very firmly on record. Colleges and universities, of course, are also playing their role, but they will be constrained if we cannot send them more articulate pupils. These institutions recognise very clearly the need to collaborate effectively, and according to a report, again by the CBI, those that have the strongest links are the ones who are delivering the best opportunities. May I finish, Deputy Presiding Officer, on the issue of modern languages? We've seen a lot about this in the press just recently. Modern languages are absolutely crucial to the success of our youngsters. Again, if you look at the trading statistics, it's very, very clear indeed about why there is a need for these modern languages, and at the moment we have a problem in this area. We rehearsed that a bit last week, but it comes down again to what is offered in our core subjects and about the support that we can give through the colleges and universities system to that. So again, we are very happy to support the Government's motion and also the Labour amendment.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the open debate. Speeches of 6 minutes, please, with a bit of leeway for interventions at this stage of the debate. And I call on Mark MacDonald to be followed by Margaret McCulloch.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It was interesting that Liz Smith finished on the subject of modern languages. I recently visited Dainston Primary School in Aberdeen, which used to be which was in my old council ward, and was learning about the work that is being done there, the positive work around the teaching of Mandarin Chinese to primary school pupils. One of the difficulties that's being faced by the scheme to introduce Mandarin Chinese is through the visa restrictions, which are not allowing for 2 to 3 year secondments for Chinese teachers to come and teach in Scotland, because they are only being awarded a 12-month visa with the potential of a 12-month extension, but no guarantee of that. I hope that the work that I know the Scottish Government is doing, will help to persuade the UK Government to look sympathetically on that scheme as a possible issue where they could relax those visa restrictions, and I would hope that we could count on Liz Smith's support to perhaps use her influences on the UK Government in that regard. It was my great privilege, Presiding Officer, to be invited to speak at the launch of the Prince's Trust Get Into Energy event at the Marcliffe Hotel in Aberdeen on the 22nd of April. At the event, we heard a moving testimony from a Prince's Trust ambassador, Mary Cope, a young Aberdeen mum whose work with the Prince's Trust programme saw her turn her life around. Mary began skipping school at a very young age and very quickly fell into bad company, finding herself involved in abusive relationships and substance misuse. She became a mother, a single mother, and found herself saddled with significant financial debts and under constant fear of visits from debt collectors to her home, which led her to developing a severe fear of opening the door when the door was knocked. Thanks to the Get Into Retail programme from the Prince's Trust, Mary was able to remove herself from some of the negative influences that she was surrounded by. She was able to turn her life around, and she now stands as a youth ambassador for the Prince's Trust and a strong testimony to the success of the Prince's Trust programmes in helping young people, vulnerable young people, to turn their lives around and get into work. And that's what the focus of the Get Into Energy programme was about. The event was held during North East Business Week and served as a good example of how large local employers, in particular the oil and gas sector, which, as we know, is extremely prominent in the North East of Scotland, can use their influence and expertise to make a difference to disadvantaged young people in the area, and also use their corporate social responsibility budgets and departments to best effect by investing in these young people who may in future become their staff. There is a clear correlation, Presiding Officer, between youth unemployment and mental health issues. There is also a clear correlation between youth unemployment and growing up in some of our more deprived communities on the SIMD index. By investing in schemes like Get Into Energy, other Prince's Trust schemes, companies can make a targeted difference and try to mitigate the effect of austerity, because we know that austerity hits those who were vulnerable before recession hardest. So we are through promoting these programmes and promoting company involvement in these programmes, we can make a targeted difference to these people, who are the people who probably most need targeted support and assistance to gain access to the workforce. But of particular interest in the North East at the moment is the Energy Leadership Group, which is a group of specifically energy companies who come together to provide opportunities to disadvantaged young people, mostly from the North East of Scotland. The way the scheme works is that companies pay money to the Prince's Trust to carry out their work, and in return, the young people come in onto their training and mentoring programmes and potentially go on to work for the companies. They provide internships and training schemes in their companies for young people who are interested in the sector, and they also issue development awards. Now, while it is clear that not everybody who goes into this scheme will then subsequently find employment within the company that they're involved with, I think the very fact that they are getting that opportunity to develop as individuals stands them in far better stead going out into the jobs market than perhaps would otherwise be the case were these schemes not in existence. I also want to mention the work of Young Scotland's Got Talent, Presiding Officer. It's a campaign for young people with learning disabilities and young people on the autistic spectrum to help them access employment support services that they need for those who are able to and want to take part in employment. Takes the form of a roadshow at various venues across Scotland. It's organised jointly by Scottish Consortium for Learning Disabilities, Enable Scotland and Values into Action Scotland. And it gathers together young people with learning disabilities on the autistic spectrum, their families, professional bodies, public bodies, including colleges and government agencies, to come together and share ideas, experiences and opportunities for gaining employment and further skills. And I think that the fact that it brings together individuals who would benefit from supported employment schemes with the organisations who have the capacity to provide them helps to make those links and make those connections for people who often can find it difficult to access the jobs market. The next event is to be held in the Grampian region. It's being held at the Aberdeen Arts Centre on Wednesday the 5th of June, and I would hope that the Minister might consider this as an invitation to come up to Aberdeen and visit the event and see for herself the work that is being done there. I know that the Glasgow event in 2010 was attended by 350 young people, and there were more than almost 400 more who wanted to attend, but because of the size of the venue were not able to do so. That demonstrates the capacity and the appetite for this that is out there. And we also have seen locally in Aberdeen my colleague Gordon Townsend in the SNP group in Aberdeen promoting a youth employment strategy for Aberdeen City Council through a notice of motion to the Council. Aberdeen has a youth employment rate well above the national average, but I think it is quite clear from this debate and from the Government's actions we cannot be complacent. But I believe the schemes that I have highlighted here, plus the actions the Scottish Government are taking and other agencies are taking, demonstrate that we are taking this matter very seriously indeed.
Thank you very much. And we now call on Margaret McCulloch to be followed by Gordon MacDonald. A generous 6 minutes. Please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government's motion makes reference to the fall in youth unemployment over a 12-month period, and in my own Central Scotland region there has also been a drop in unemployment consistent with that trend. But let's remember that the levels of youth unemployment in places like Falkirk and Lanarkshire have remained above the national average for some time now, and the national average itself is still too high. Many of the communities I represent are not simply trying to cope with the rise in unemployment which came after the banking crash, but are still dealing with the legacy of unemployment and industrial decline over a period of 30 years. Too many families and too many communities have experienced 2 or 3 generations of worklessness, and with levels of long-term unemployment continuing to be stubborn, this Government must work even harder to prevent a 4th. Today I want to speak about how we raise employment levels, but also about how we use training to help young people enter the labour market and secure continuing employment as the economy hopefully recovers. I also want to stress the role of 2 different groups who are absolutely crucial in responding to youth unemployment in Scotland, but who can often be overlooked: training providers and local authorities. The challenges confronting our universities and colleges have been well documented, but others have spoken today about the difficulties facing further education, particularly the impact of the Scottish Government's disproportionate cuts to college budgets. However, the Government statistics tell us that of all those young people who reach positive destinations when they leave publicly funded secondary schools, over 5% actually go straight into training. Many of those who become unemployed or go down other routes will also participate in some kind of training programme at a later point in their lives. The Scottish Government and Skills Development Scotland have historically maintained a good relationship with Scotland's training providers, but that relationship appears to have become strained with the transition to the new Employability Fund. The Employability Fund effectively replaces Get Ready for Work, Training for Work, the new College Learning Programme, targeted pathways to apprenticeships and the Third Sector Challenge Fund. Those are a wide-ranging set of changes, and my concern, and I understand the concern of many training providers, is that change has been introduced without enough preparatory work or adequate consultation with the sector. Our young people deserve more than a rush job. I am also concerned that the way the Employability Fund has been allocated is creating duplication and complications that need not exist. Training providers find the procurement process difficult enough and can all too easily be swamped when contracts go out to tender. At a time when the Scottish Government is trying to simplify public procurement, I can't understand why they appear to be replacing a single funding agency with 32 different set-ups for 32 different authorities. Further to last week's debate on the voluntary sector, the Scottish Government agreed that there was a case for 3-year funding and longer-term contracts, because contracting annually can create uncertainty and make it difficult for charities to plan budgets. I want to stress to the Minister today that extending the length of training contracts would remove a substantial recurrent admin burden from training providers and would help suppliers budget for costs such as property, training equipment and staffing. Surely we all want our training providers to be given the space to concentrate on what they do best, and that is training. The other group whose role I want to stress the importance of are local authorities. Councils have crucial leadership roles in developing the economic potential of their areas and boosting employment and training opportunities. We can learn a lot from best practice and partnership working at a local level. There is no shortage of good examples in my area from each of the 3 local authorities I cover, as well as their key strategic partners. My Future's in Falkirk, North Lanarkshire's Working and South Lanarkshire Works for You. Those are three vital economic development initiatives which assist young people and local people more generally with job seeking and training. But I also want to emphasise the importance of wage subsidy and highlight the Youth Jobs Fund in South Lanarkshire. The Youth Jobs Fund is a 50% wage subsidy for up to 50 weeks for 16 to 17-year-olds. Where they can, the Council will even help employers with training costs. It's a great example of a wage subsidy which has already been taken up by 80 different companies, and it is one we can learn from if we're serious about intervening in the labour market and turning Community Jobs Scotland into what it should be, a new future jobs fund for Scotland. Presiding Officer, the Minister spoke about a very welcome decline in youth unemployment, but we have some way to go if we are to bring levels down further. Learn from best practice and give young people the skills they need to take advantage of the upturn when the recovery eventually comes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I now call on Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Jane Baxter.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's young people are the key to our country's future prosperity, and that is why over the period from 2012 to 2015 the Scottish Government is harnessing over £80 million of funding to support youth employment. This £80 million will support a range of initiatives, including Opportunities for All, the Employer Recruitment Incentive, use of European structural funds to support business growth and youth employment, a fund to support young people into opportunities linked to major cultural and sporting events hosted in Scotland, funding to support graduate recruitment schemes and to offer loans to young entrepreneurs. At the beginning of this month, the Scottish Government announced that Scottish Business is backing the Certificate of Work Readiness. The Federation of Small Businesses, CBI Scotland and large companies like Diageo and Scottish Power have all endorsed this new scheme piloted by Skills Development Scotland. Targeted at 16 to 19-year-olds, it will consist of college-based learning time and 190 hours of real-life work experience. Training allowances and educational maintenance allowances will be available to those taking part. This will help answer employers' concerns that they have no way of knowing if a young person is fit for work. The Modern Apprenticeship Scheme surpassed again the 25,000 target set by the Government, and there were nearly 3,000 more 16 to 24-year-olds starting a modern apprenticeship than the previous year. A survey of Scottish employers' views of the modern apprenticeships reported high levels of satisfaction, with 83% satisfied with the quality of training and 85% on the relevance of the training. 75% of employers viewed modern apprenticeships as either vital or important to their businesses, and 96% of employers reported that when apprentices had completed their training, they were better able to do their job. The skills and experience obtained by modern apprentices resulted in 92% of apprentices in work 6 months after completing the training, with 79% of those in full-time employment. The Construction Industry Training Board, Construction Skills Scotland briefing for this debate, they've highlighted that despite the downturn in the industry, they continue to support the modern apprenticeship scheme. Last year there were 1,300 new apprentices, which was up 15% on the previous year. There are still difficulties facing the construction sector, not helped by the UK Government cutting Scotland's capital budget by 25%. However, there is recognition that the industry is facing a retirement time bomb, as the number of construction workers under the age of 24 has nearly halved over the last 20 years. Companies continue to recruit apprenticeships into a variety of roles to develop their skills and experience. Otherwise, there will be an increasing skills shortage when the industry returns to growth. The Scottish Government's Employer Recruitment Incentive Scheme will operate in partnership with local authorities to support small and medium-sized companies, helping them to expand and develop, and in doing so provide jobs and experience for young people. The £25 million scheme, supported by EU funding, will offer a recruitment incentive to take on young people aged between 16 and 24. The Federation of Small Businesses report Micros Untapped, realising the employment potential of micro businesses, published in November 2012, highlighted that businesses with fewer than 10 employees make up nearly 94% of Scottish businesses and provide 27% of the private sector jobs in Scotland. Over 40% of unemployed people who find work in the private sector go to work in a micro-business or become self-employed. The report, however, also highlighted that small businesses face a range of risks and difficulties, from lack of experience in recruitment to lack of knowledge in employment law. Many of these difficulties can be resolved by support from national agencies, small business bodies and local agencies. The Scottish Government's Employer Recruitment Incentive Scheme and a Certificate of Work Readiness will hopefully encourage many micro-businesses to start recruiting and growing their business. The Scottish Government's Make Young People Your Business highlights what young people can bring to your organisation, whether it is developing young talent to help with succession planning, unplanned retirement or skills shortages. By employing a young person and supporting them through modern apprenticeships, employers can gain skills tailored to their needs, young people being creative, innovative and willing to learn, and will support business growth. Presiding Officer, Scotland continues to perform better than the UK on the headline youth measures, with lower unemployment, higher employment and lower inactivity. Over the last year, there has been a drop of 29,000 in youth unemployment in Scotland. The Labour Force survey published in April identified the youth unemployment rate at 16%, compared to a UK rate of nearly 21%. Although we continue to improve and outperform the UK, our youth unemployment figure is still too high, and we need to learn from our European neighbours how countries like Austria, Germany or the Netherlands have managed to have relatively low youth unemployment of less than 10%. The Minister highlighted that she supports the proposed European Youth Guarantee to offer unemployed young people a job, an apprenticeship, a place in education or traineeship once they reach 4 months unemployed. I'm just finished in the middle of my last minute. In fact, I'm nearly finished. The difficulty is that the UK Government is responsible for schemes like the Youth Contract and the Work Programme here in Scotland, and has so far declined to take part in the European Youth Guarantee. We need the full powers of an independent country so that we can devise economic policies to grow our economy and reduce youth unemployment to those low European levels. Thank you.
Now call on Jane Baxter to be followed by Stuart Stevenson. Just point out there is plenty of time for interventions should members wish to take them. Matter for them entirely, of course. Ms Baxter.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Sorry, I had to just move desks there. That desk wasn't working, so I'll just reassemble my papers and gather my thoughts. And I should declare an interest. I'm a councillor in Fife. I'm pleased to be able to speak in this debate and to return to the issue of youth employment, the topic which formed the subject of my maiden speech in this chamber just some 4 months ago. In that contribution, I highlighted some of the work being undertaken by local authorities to tackle youth employment and to provide opportunities for young people. In particular, I flagged up Fife Council's £5 million investment into apprenticeships for unemployed young people. Now I wish to return to the opportunities which have been created by that 3-year fund, because we know that youth unemployment is an issue that spans Scotland in both urban and rural areas alike. Like many regions, Mid-Scotland and Fife is a diverse and mixed economy, yet in many of the more rural areas it is traditional land-based skills and jobs which are central to the employment opportunities in the region. A recent report by Scottish Natural Heritage has estimated that nearly 1 in 7 of all full-time jobs in Scotland, that's around 242,000 jobs, are supported by economic activity linked to a sustainable development approach. Which is why I am so pleased to see that the latest development from the Fife Youth Job Contract has seen 85 training opportunities created which will provide apprenticeships in key rural skills, ranging from working on golf courses, core paths, timber and landscaping, to woodland management and environmental conservation. Businesses in rural areas need to be able to employ well-trained and highly skilled staff, and equally, young people living in rural areas need to be able to reach employment opportunities that are accessible, rewarding and of high quality. What has been central to the successful establishment of these training opportunities has been the partnership working of the local authority with a range of training providers, including Fife Golf Trust, River Leven Development, Living Solutions Scotland, the Centre for Stewardship at Falkland and the Ecology Centre. For many of these rural skills training partners, it is not just apprenticeships that are being offered. There are other opportunities too, and in the debate today, the contribution and central importance of employers to developing opportunities for young people has been highlighted. The Ecology Centre, currently based at Kinghorn Loch, is an excellent example of a social enterprise which is making a real difference to its community. On a recent visit there, I was able to meet with young people who are gaining work experience through the volunteer placement opportunities which are being offered. Crucially, these opportunities, some of which are provided in partnership with Project Scotland, provide financial support to the young people taking part, with a living allowance and a travel subsistence available so that your circumstances do not dictate your ability to participate. For many of the young people at the Ecology Centre, it's a route of opportunity and a route out of long-term unemployment. But in many rural parts of Scotland, there's not just the challenge of finding jobs and training, but the challenges of remoteness, of connectivity, of high travel costs, or no travel at all, to enable young people to even begin to access employment or skills development opportunities in the first place. And it's not just politicians in this chamber who are saying this. Recently elected MSYPs in Fife have told me that transport and the role it plays in giving young people access to college, jobs or leisure opportunities is one of their key concerns. For many of these MSYPs, it was a key part of their manifestos. But to return to the motion, while I welcome the commitment to deliver 25,000 modern apprentices each year, the 29,000 drop in the last year in youth unemployment leaves some questions unanswered. We need to know where these young people are. Have they gone into college, taken up a training place or got a job, or have they just fallen out of the system altogether? And the reason this matters is that we need to know which approaches are working and which are not, because we need to do the very best we can for all young people in Scotland. Perth and Kinross Citizens Advice Bureau carried out a study last summer into employment issues facing young people in that part of Mid-Scotland and Fife. The report from that study, which I recommend to members, highlighted, and I quote, that the greatest percentage of persons claiming job seekers allowance as a proportion of the resident population of that age group are 18 to 24-year-olds. And of those that were in work, the report found that many of those young people were in temporary employment and faced greater exposure to poor working practices, withholding of pay, enforced overtime or unfair dismissal. So we need to look beyond the statistics and look at the outcomes being delivered and make sure that young people do get the skills, experience and confidence which will be for them a passport to lifelong learning, satisfying employment and a secure income, which will enable them to support Scotland's economy today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Liam MacArthur. A generous 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'll try and come in under half an hour. Can I start by saying I listened with great interest to Ken McIntosh's contribution, and I take in good heart the preparedness to make common ground on the essential core of this debate. I think that's very welcome indeed. He mentioned that some of the statistics upon which we rely are experimental statistics, and it may be of value to go and look at the Office of National Statistics, because of course that is where these statistics come from, and see what being experimental actually means. It is not about them being imperfect or unreliable. All new statistical series are initially designated as experimental until there is a long enough run of the series to see that they do truly reflect and are reliable. So Ken McIntosh is correct to say, let's not, bet the bank on what is an experimental set of statistics. But I think it's equally important to realise that the professional standards and methods by which what are currently designated experimental statistics are produced are exactly the same high standards, with an expectation on the part of the Office of National Statistics that we will end up adopting these. Not all experimental stats are published. They may be developed and internally used for a period of 12 months or 24 months before they escape into the light of day. But I think it's recognised that this is such a fundamentally important area of public discourse that these statistics should be published while still having this formal but not normally common usage of the word experimental. And I thought it might be useful to underpin some of the debate with that explanation from the Office of National Statistics. The whole issue of youth employment, of course, is today a very different context from the one which I and others of my age group experienced when we were youngsters. I studied at university and graduated with an extremely modest degree. In fact, my degree is spectacular for its modesty rather than for anything else, and yet had 3 good job offers. Furthermore, when I was a student, never, when I looked for a job in summer, Christmas or Easter, did I fail to get one. The economic environment was very different. Today, students from the university sector with a second degree may not even be getting a second look from employers. So we are in a very different position in the round. The North East of Scotland, Mark MacDonald's excellent contribution delineated some of the differences there are there. And our issues, perhaps in the North East, are actually a lack of trained and appropriate staff rather than a lack of jobs for people to go into. And indeed, in my constituency, we have one of the lowest proportions of school leavers who go into tertiary education of any constituency in Scotland. And the reason is a good reason, in that they can all go into employment without having to do further training. But nonetheless, I think it is very important that the modern apprenticeship approach supports these people, because that easy transition into work, by comparison with others that there may be in the North East of Scotland, is not something that necessarily equips people for a lifetime of employment. So I very much support Banff-and-Buchan College, Aberdeen College, who've focused their efforts on providing training that's appropriate to local needs, and that largely means engineering training. We've had excellent support from local employers like Macduff Shipyard and Score and Peterhead, who employ huge numbers of apprentices and indeed advertise for apprentices. And of course, like all apprenticeships, these are linked to employment, and I think it's particularly good that we see those who come out of modern apprenticeship, huge proportion of these, 6 months later, remain in employment. Training and employment are so closely linked that they are, of course, important. I will. John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way, and it's encouraging the picture he has of the North East. Does he think that perhaps schools in other parts of Scotland should be doing more to point young people towards engineering and such jobs?
I think John Mason makes a very valid point, and perhaps it's one too that we should further extend by saying, in particular, we should encourage not just young men, but young women to take engineering. And in the North East, it's quite interesting how many of the high-performing apprentices turn out to be young women who've got a mathematical skill they've acquired in school, which they then go on in college and in employment to apply. Because the North Sea oil industry will, for example, provide many decades of employment, a lifetime employment for those who choose, renewable energy very, very similarly. So the college sector in the North East, as in the rest of Scotland, is a very important one in supporting increased employment for our youngsters. It is, of course, more expensive to train someone with engineering skills than it is to train someone in certain other disciplines. We need, for example, if you're talking about lathes, to have 2 people in the room supervising that activity for health and safety reasons, quite properly, so your costs are higher. And historically, until this government engaged with the college sector in a different way, we had difficulties getting adequate funding for these courses that cost significantly more. I'm very pleased too that the Scottish Government, in the contracts that it lets, is almost invariably finding space to support youngsters and apprenticeships through that mechanism. And I was delighted when I was a minister to meet apprentices whose jobs were being created directly as a result of the Scottish Government placing contracts. So I think the Government, at its own hand, is doing the kind of things that it should be. It is creating the educational environment for people to acquire the skills that they're going to need. And, of course, let me just conclude by saying we've heard quite a lot, quite properly, from people in areas not as lucky as the North East, where the stress is much greater. But even in the North East, we have our own pockets of deprivation in Aberdeen, and even in my constituency, one of the most well-performing constituencies in employment terms, our unemployment rate's 1/3 of the Scottish average. Even there, one of the 10 areas of maximum deprivation was within my constituency. I'm delighted to say that some of the initiatives that the Government has taken are starting to make a difference to that. In youth employment, as in so many things, the Government, with the powers that it has, is doing a terrific job. Would that we had the powers to do more. Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. Many thanks. Now call on Liam MacArthur to be followed by Jamie Hepburn. A generous 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Like Stuart Stevenson, I hope to further burnish my reputation for pith. But I welcome today's debate. I think it's generally been a very constructive debate, and happy to confirm that we'll be supporting both Angela Constance's motion and also the amendment in Mr McIntosh's name. I was struck actually earlier on in the debate that some of the issues we were discussing yesterday during the course of the debate on early learning and childcare have a relevance to what we're discussing today, not because they offer any real quick fixes, but I think certainly in terms of the contribution that young people can and will play in supporting Scotland's economy in the longer term. I think the decisions we take in that area now will have a very real impact in due course. But on the substance of today's debate, I think it's right for the Government to highlight the drop in youth unemployment from the most recent labour force study. Mr McIntosh likewise is right to enter a few caveats and health warnings, but I didn't detect a great deal of complacency around those figures. I think there is also a need to acknowledge that the long-term unemployed figure is stubbornly going in the wrong direction. And I think all of us, as Liz Smith indicated, would agree that the figures for youth unemployment are still too high. Now, the reasons why progress is being made are, I think, many and various, and relate to a lot of the targeted interventions that have been raised already, that are in the motion, but also are subject to factors that Ken McIntosh indicated go a good deal wider. I mean, employers offering job, training, work experience opportunities absolutely part of the approach we need to be adopting. I think the Scottish Government can take some satisfaction in terms of the way that the Modern Apprenticeships programme has worked and is working, although it would be interesting to know what the breakdown within that is for modern apprenticeships in the private, public and third sectors. And looking at the detail in relation to the certificate for work readiness, I mean, this does look like a positive initiative. It seems to offer the opportunity for individuals to demonstrate the potential, but at the same time gaining experience. And I think it chimes with something we heard at the cross-party group on colleges and universities at lunchtime about practice-based learning. And Professor Stonehouse, the Dean of Napier Business School, I think illustrated this point by asking us to imagine what it would be like if we went to university without being able to swim, and were learning to swim as a college or a university class-based course, with learning to swim and the key components necessary to swim. I think that experience, the immersion in the place of work, is absolutely critical and helps individuals develop the skills they need. And I was struck by Janet Brown's quote, and I certainly would, yeah.
That traditionally, for as long as anybody can remember, employers have to accept some responsibility too, so that those they take into their employment as young people do in fact learn what is required of them by doing the job, and that's a responsibility the employers have, traditionally have had, and should still have today.
Liam McCarthy.
I think that's a very fair point, and whatever initiatives we put in place, we cannot shift the onus too far away from that. However, in the current economic circumstances, I think we need to recognise that it is nobody's interest to see employers simply shed workers or indeed not take on people in apprenticeship and traineeship roles simply because the finances are tight. I think, however, where I would maybe take exception to the government's motion is in a slightly churlish attempt to ignore the role that the UK government has played in this. It quite rightly draws attention to the Scottish Government, EU funding and indeed local council contribution, but to make no reference whatsoever to the UK Government's youth contract, I think, is unfortunate. There's £1 billion of investment to help young unemployed in the 18 to 24-year-old category, helping them to get a foot on the ladder and targeted more particularly at the longer term unemployed. It does provide wage incentives, allowing employers to claim up to £2,275 to help cover the costs of things like national insurance, to fund extra training and supervision. And I think it dovetails well with many of the other initiatives that the Scottish Government and others are taking forward, and it has similarities, as I said in an earlier intervention, to the approach in Germany, which I think various members have acknowledged has a particularly good track record in this area. If I could maybe turn to something I've touched on in previous debates on this issue, and that's the issue of those furthest away from the job market. Now, I appreciate that this affects a wide number of different groups, and I thought Mark MacDonald reflected on this very well in his, I thought, thoughtful contribution. But the figures that we have in terms of those that are furthest from the labour market are not encouraging. I'd note that Bernardo's, for example, talked that 36% of looked-after children are still looking for employment 6 months after leaving school, which is almost 4 times the average for school leavers as a whole, and the figures for further education are similarly poor. Now, Bernardo's argues strongly for a third sector involvement in things like opportunities for all at a local level and youth action plans, and point to, quote, a serious gap in long-term nurturing and supportive provision for care leavers. Now, clearly there is work underway. There are programmes that are working well, but I don't think we should lose sight of the specific needs and the more intensive engagement that's required in this area. In preparing for the debate, I also was struck by a contribution from the Carnegie Trust, who talked about young people are expected to work in new environments and sectors for new and changing organisations, and to do so with greater flexibility. The younger generation needs the skills relevant to a changing economy, and the Scottish Government can help to address this by the need to continue to invest in youth enterprise and entrepreneurship as part of the skills strategy. Now, I think, like Ian Gray, was involved in earlier initiatives like Determined to Succeed, and I think those are now far better embedded in the education process. But Carnegie seemed to be indicating that while at a primary and secondary level the reflection of that is good, in colleges it is perhaps more diluted, which was again surprising given what we were hearing at the cross-party group at lunchtime, where a lot of the collaborative approach and the examples of energy and hospitality seem to contradict Carnegie's findings. But finally, can I perhaps touch on the issue of college cuts that is borne out in Mr McIntosh's amendment. This is an issue, obviously, that I and my party have taken a strong interest in over the last couple of years. And again, looking at the briefing from Colleges Scotland for this debate, they talk of a growing disparity of esteem, which is leading to a reduction in funding. And again, this chimed with something that Professor Stonehouse from Napier University was talking about in terms of the false divide between more vocational and academic streams of education. I think we also need to recognise that the impact that those cost cuts are having on the outcomes for older learners. The Minister drew attention to the recent Economist article on the phenomenon of youth unemployment worldwide, and I think she was right also to point out that this concluded with some encouragement. I think the news of the recent downward trajectory in terms of youth unemployment is part of that pattern and does give us some cause for optimism, but I don't think there can be any let-up in the targeted interventions, particularly practice-based learning and opportunities to develop skills in the workplace and environment, which are delivering results. Collaboration by both Scotland's governments, our whole education sector, councils and the business community are an essential part of, I think, what the Minister herself referred to as an all-Scotland approach. There are areas such as college funding, support for those furthest from the labour market and even early learning where I think much more attention is needed. But I'm happy to support the Government's motion and indeed Labour's amendment. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and very much welcome this afternoon's debate. I thank the Scottish Government for securing this subject matter, because it's clearly vital to ensure that Scotland's youngsters have the opportunity to make their way in the world of work. And we're all acutely aware of the economic circumstances of the time, the economic difficulties we've experienced here in Scotland and elsewhere over the last few years. And young people in many countries are really bearing the brunt of that downturn in many parts of the world. If we look at the situation in Spain and Greece, there are dramatic levels of youth unemployment. So it is good then that figures are moving in the right direction in Scotland. If we look at the claimant count in March 2013 for young people aged 18 to 24, there was a decrease of 5,500, some 12.6% over the year. If we look at the labour force survey from December to February 2013, youth employment in Scotland is 56.7%, as opposed to the UK position of 49.7%. Youth unemployment in Scotland is 16.1%, still too high, but compared to the UK position of 20.6%. Clearly, there are still far too many young people in Scotland not employed. We have to do what we can to assist them into work. But I think it is important to record the good news. The figures are going the right way, and also in context, youth employment is higher in Scotland than across the UK, and youth unemployment is lower in Scotland than across the UK. And as the Minister pointed out, youth employment rate is only bettered by 5 other European countries. But it is important, of course, to do what we can to help those still needing assistance. In that regard, I want to take a look at what the Scottish Government is doing. First of all, I want to look at the modern apprenticeship scheme, which does come in for criticism from some quarters, but we need to acknowledge the fact that the target of 25,000 modern apprenticeships has been met again for the second year in a row. And in 12-13 there were some 2,126 modern apprenticeships in the North Lanarkshire area alone, which of course my constituency is part of. But looking beyond those headline figures, we can see that the scheme is being targeted on the young. It's of course available to those older, but it is being focused on the young. In 11-12, some 16,791 of the modern apprenticeships were for those aged 16 to 24, and 12-13 it was 19,681, nearly 3,000 more on a year-on-year basis. Some 77% of modern apprenticeships were for the 16 to 24 cohort in 12-13. So it's clear that the scheme has been better focused on the people we're talking about today, the young people of Scotland. But I think it's important to look also at the quality of the scheme, because there was a survey of Scottish employers' views of the modern apprenticeships in 2013. 96% of employers reported that MA completers were better able to do their jobs. Employers reported high levels of satisfaction with the relevance, 85%, and quality, 83% of the training provided. 75% of employers viewed modern apprenticeships as either important or vital to their business. 83% of employers who currently offer modern apprenticeships plan to do so in future. And Skills Development Scotland research shows that of those who complete modern apprenticeships, 92% are in work 6 months later and 79% are in full-time employment. Now, that's not to say that there isn't still more. There aren't issues with apprenticeships, of course. Colleges of Scotland did suggest that one of the principal barriers to increasing interest in modern apprenticeships is the lack of knowledge of young people, parents, carers and school teaching staff, and a historical view that apprenticeships should not be a young person's first choice. So it would be interesting to hear the Minister's perspective on that matter. But I think by any assessment, it's clear that modern apprenticeships are being focused on the right people, and the quality of them is held in high regard by those employers taking part. I also want to look... yes, indeed.
Ian McArthur.
I'm very grateful to Mr Hepburn for taking the intervention. I mean, he will have heard my remarks about modern apprenticeships earlier on. Does he accept that some concerns exist in terms of the age profile for modern apprenticeships, either in particular sectors or in different parts of the country, where the age profile may not just sit quite as well with that under 24 age group?
Jamie.
Well, I mean, to reiterate the point, I mean, in 11, 12, 16 to 24-year-olds form 63.5% of those in modern apprenticeships. In the 12-13 year, it was 77%. So I think it's clearly moving in the right direction, Mr McArthur. I want to focus on the college sector, which was mentioned by Mr McIntosh. It's prone to much comment by many of late, although not so much noticed for the Labour candidate for the forthcoming Aberdeen Donside by-election, presiding officer. But I think we should celebrate the good record that there is in the college sector, because colleges in 11-12 delivered nearly 120,000 full-time equivalent places, and that was it was 3% over the commitment of the Scottish Government. There has been a 36% increase in the average hours of learning per student, and a 1% increase in funded full-time equivalent places between 2006 and 11-12. And this is an issue that has been raised with me when I've been engaged with the college in my area. There was always concern about the certainty in budgets for colleges. We know that there is certainty for colleges for the next 2 years. There is stability in the funding from this year to the next. By comparison, in the closest comparable budget in England is down 15.7%. So I think, again, we see that there is much good work being done in the college sector. Yes, indeed, Mr McIntosh.
Ian McIntosh.
I'm anxious that the debate doesn't descend into a sort of exchange over statistics, but I couldn't quite let Jimmy Hepburn's picture of the Scottish college scene go unchallenged there. Does he recognise that there has been a huge drop in headcount, the number of people actually attending college in Scotland over the last 5 years, a huge drop, measured in the tens of thousands, that part-time students have all lost their places, that the number of people with learning difficulties, a third of people with learning difficulties have lost their courses, and that there are actually people queuing up to get into Scotland's colleges. He says he makes a virtue out of stability of funding, but that stability is a 25 million cut this year and another 25 million cut next.
Well, of course, the funding, we all know the funding situation across the UK, which has clear consequences for the funding that is available here in Scotland, a set of circumstances that Mr McIntosh is presently engaged in a campaign to ensure remains the case. And I reiterate the point I made, that the closest comparable budget for colleges in England is down some 15.7%. That has clear consequences for the money available for colleges in Scotland, Mr McIntosh. And in terms of the number of places at colleges, I reiterate the point that there was, I've given you I think I said nearly 120,000. Let me give you the exact figure, Mr McIntosh. Colleges delivered 119,448 full-time equivalent places in 2011, 3% over the commitment that was given. I think that is a good record. Indeed, I will then, Presiding Officer. I had hoped to focus on a number of other initiatives that the Scottish Government is taking forward, but let me conclude by saying I think there are many good examples of what is happening on the ground. That is not to say that there isn't still a challenge out there, but I am confident that the Minister is up to that challenge, and I look forward to seeing her taking work forward in the future.
Many thanks. Now calling Kevin Stewart, to be followed by Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome taking part in today's debate. I think that when we are discussing these issues, they are some of the most paramount problems that we have got to contend with. I know that the Minister shares my passion for this subject because, like me, and I don't want to give a lady's age away, she grew up in the years of Thatcher and watched as devastation took place in many parts of the country and where youth unemployment rates were very high indeed in many, many areas, including at that time in the north east of Scotland. Some of the initiatives which were kind of frowned upon at that time by central government, which came about, still thrive in the north east today. Presiding Officer, as my colleagues Mark MacDonald and Stuart Stevenson have said already today, in the north east of Scotland we are in a slightly different position from many other parts of the country in terms of very high youth employment. But Mr Stevenson and Mr MacDonald rightly pointed out that there are still some difficulties in terms of areas of social deprivation and folks with special needs. And I think that we need to counter some of the difficulties that still exist. In the North East, 71% of businesses, in a recent North East Business Week 2013 research, which was conducted by Aberdeen Grampian Chamber of Commerce, the FSB, SCDI and Enterprise North East Trust, said that they were going to expand and grow within the next 3 years. That is 71% of businesses. And what we need to be able to do is to match the skills to that growth that is going to take place. I certainly will, Mr Stevenson.
I don't know if the member is aware that Aberdeen Business News today reports that in the last year 50% of all of Scotland's new office lettings were in the north east of Scotland.
I didn't know that. I haven't read all of today's news, but I'm very grateful to Mr Stevenson for that. I think that again shows that the economy of the North East is growing. And we have seen business in the North East look very carefully at how they are going to staff up during these years of expansion. And the same survey, as I mentioned previously, says that 8% of operating budget on average are being spent on learning development in the north east of Scotland. I think that is a healthy sign. I think in some areas they could probably spend a little bit more. But beyond that, I know that these companies are very grateful for the support that is being provided by this government. The Minister, at the very outset of her speech, said we must have the right talent for immediate and future needs. I could not agree more. And I think there are many initiatives in my neck of the woods, as well as elsewhere, which are trying to ensure that we do have that right talent. ITCA training in my own constituency, which I've communicated with the Minister about recently, are one of the organisations which are making sure that that right talent is in place. Beyond that, we have heard from Mr MacDonald about the Energy Leadership Group and the Prince's Youth Trust, ensuring that that right talent is in place. And I am really pleased that this government has a commitment to Energy Skills Academy, which will ensure that that right talent is in place. At this moment in time, in the city of Aberdeen, there are 4 applicants for every 10 jobs. We are the city which is the best place to get a job in the whole of these islands at this moment in time. What we also must be able to do is allow young folk the flexibility to move to those jobs. That's not a case of Norman Tebbett's get on your bike, which was absolute nonsense. We must create opportunities where people are able to go and study and take up work in areas where there are opportunity. I think that if we can do that, the North East would certainly welcome these I certainly will, Ms Mara.
Jane Mara.
I thank the member for giving way. Would Mr Stewart recognise that a lot of barriers which have been rehearsed in this chamber before regarding the North East are faced by young people to try and get a bus to their work? And this was raised by my colleague Jane Baxter as well. And there's people across the North East in areas of Aberdeen and in Dundee are finding it very difficult because bus services are being cut, frequencies are being cut, and there's no regulatory system in place by this government to help with that.
Well, I think the main problem in the great city of Aberdeen regarding buses is not services being cut, it's services being changed and very high bus fares from a company first which was born in the city of Aberdeen and seems to now use our city as a cash cow. I am quite happy to campaign with Ms Mara in Aberdeen to try and get first to change their current policies, charging policies and other ludicrous ideas that they have come up with. Not at the moment. Let me finish, please, Mr Gray. Because, quite frankly, the First are doing a disservice not only to the young people of Aberdeen, but to all Aberdonians. And beyond that, they would actually increase patronage if they actually listened to some of the campaigners who are calling for that decrease in bus fares. And I have to say, while I am on my feet, it's not as though they are not making huge profits out of Aberdeen and out of elsewhere. But let me move on, Presiding Officer. We have to have, as the Minister says, that right business case for investing in young people. There should be public-private partnerships to ensure that we provide the right training and the flexibility of training to allow folk to get the jobs that are already out there, and to ensure that they succeed in the industries of today and of tomorrow. I am convinced that we are helping in all the ways that we can here from this place. What I do wish is that we had all of the levers of power and be able to change the tax and benefit system to ensure that we could do even better. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Now I call on Patricia Ferguson to be followed by Mike Mackenzie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With a consistently high rate of unemployment in my constituency, it will come as no surprise to colleagues to hear that this is an issue that I take particularly seriously. And the situation facing young people is particularly critical. If we don't prepare our young people now, there will be no one to take up the jobs that will come along when the economy eventually revives. And that is why training places at our colleges remain so important, and why the Scottish Government should be investing more money, not less, in Scotland's colleges. But we also have to look at other ways of getting young people into employment. We must be creative and adventurous, and we must reward those projects that succeed. We must also recognise good practice and learn from it. For most projects, funding is key, and many struggle to maintain the momentum of schemes, even when they have a proven track record. One project which has worked and has been recognised for its success is Royston at Work. Last year, the Rosemount Development Trust, based in the Royston area of my constituency, approached me to tell me about an idea they had, the aim of which was to encourage young people into employment. Rosemount Development Trust had never undertaken a project like this before, but their enthusiasm, their record in the community, and the research they had already undertaken led me to believe that this had the potential to be a successful project, and one which I was delighted to support. The project, which became known as Royston at Work, involved partners such as North Glasgow College, and took a group of 12 young people through a 6-month-long intensive programme, which gave them the skills, the confidence and the discipline to enable them to apply for further training, for jobs and for apprenticeships. This was not an easy option for the young people, many of whom had been unemployed since leaving school and who would be considered to be within the cohort described as furthest from work. And it was also a challenge for those most closely involved in delivering the project, such as Maureen Flynn of Rosemount Development Trust and her board, who took the initiative because they recognised a distinct need in their community. Nicola Connolly, the imaginative and dedicated project coordinator who guided the project through to its completion, also deserves to be mentioned here today. So what has the project achieved and what has happened to the trainees? Of the 12 original participants, 11 have successfully completed the course. This high number of graduates was the result of the project coordinator never giving up on the trainees, even in situations where other, perhaps less resourceful leaders might have lost heart. 11 trainees completed the National Progression Award in Construction and 10 achieved the PASMA Tower Scaffolding qualification. 4 trainees have already entered full-time employment and another 4 have secured apprenticeships, and 1 has a full-time training place. Yet another trainee is hoping to be offered an apprenticeship soon, and the 11th is in a full-time volunteering post. 2 trainees have completed their Duke of Edinburgh Bronze Award, with 8 others having only one small element left to complete. Now, all of this was achieved in spite of there being little or no support from the DWP. All but one of those trainees lost their rights to benefits and to travel and subsistence costs simply because they took up a place on this project. For Year 2, there are further funding problems, as neither Jobs and Business Glasgow nor Skills Development Scotland have as yet confirmed funding for this year. Presiding Officer, I very much regret that the DWP takes such a narrow view that young people like this, who should be given every possible help and support, are deprived of their benefits, even when they are actively taking part in such a project. But I also feel that organisations like Skills Development Scotland and Jobs and Business Glasgow should be, frankly, falling over themselves to help projects like this and not putting bureaucratic obstacles in their way. A number of the young people on this project were, shall we say, known to the police. But as you might expect, they have, in the words of the police, fallen off the radar, and are now people with a future, whose families are proud of them, and who are making a very positive contribution to their communities. And I know that I am, to a large extent today, preaching to the converted, because the young people I'm speaking about were recognised by the Minister when she participated in their awards ceremony a few months ago. But I would ask the Minister today to use her influence to encourage Skills Development Scotland and Jobs and Business Glasgow to work with Royston at Work to explain to them that this project is well worth investing in. I would also be grateful if she would agree to meet with me as the constituency MSP, together with the project coordinators, to see what other support might be available to them. Presiding Officer, the next year of the programme is now open to applicants, and I want to see another 12 people given a chance to succeed. 12 more young people able to realise a productive future for themselves and their families may not sound like a lot, but for a community the size of Royston, it is a significant number, which can grow year on year if we allow it to. Presiding Officer, I look forward to a positive response from the Minister this afternoon.
Thanks. Now call on Mike Mackenzie to be followed by Claire Adams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's necessary, when considering the issue of youth employment, to put the matter in the context of the deepest recession that any of us has ever known. In fact, the economist Stephen Boyle recently told a group of MSPs that it was the worst recession since 1870. And although we are now technically just scraping out of recession again, the economy has at best been flatlining for several years. Against this background, the ONS statistics, which show a decrease in youth unemployment in Scotland over the year of 29,000 and an increase in youth employment, are causes for optimism. They represent a heroic effort on the part of the Minister and on the part of the Scottish Government. Of course, these figures do not give any cause for complacency, but nevertheless, this is an achievement which even the most grudging members on the opposition benches should recognise. And even those most grudging members should recognise the effort too that this represents on the part of all those young folk struggling to get a start with their careers in these most difficult of times. Not to recognise their achievements as an affront not just to the young people themselves, but to everyone in Scotland who strives to give the next generation the best start to their working lives. Presiding Officer, there are those who will argue and have argued this afternoon. Certainly, Mr Mackintosh.
Ben Mackintosh.
Mackenzie and paying tribute to the young people and their efforts in securing work. Can I just ask Mr Mackenzie, 6 months ago, unemployment amongst young people in Scotland was higher than the UK, and it's currently lower than the UK average. So could I ask Mr Mackenzie to describe what intervention has the government made in the last 6 months that wasn't there 6 months ago that's made the difference?
Mackenzie. I think Mr Mackintosh will agree with me that you don't take these interventions and then see an immediate result. The interventions of any type take time to begin to work, and that we're now seeing the results of those interventions in the current statistics. And as I was saying, Presiding Officer, there are those who will argue quite correctly that unacceptably high youth unemployment predates the current recession. And this is a UK and not purely a Scottish problem. It's a long-term structural problem which has got a lot to do with the long-term mismanagement of the UK economy. It's got a lot to do with deindustrialisation, with deregulation and over-dependence on banking. And it's got a lot to do with steadily growing inequality over the last 30 years. And, Presiding Officer, inequality is important because it has a disproportionate effect on younger people, reducing the incentives of work and fostering the belief that normal aspirations are out with the reach of many people, reinforcing the cultural belief that celebrity and perhaps the lottery offer the only realistic routes out of poverty, and undermining the belief that the steady application of effort in a career is worth the effort. And a culture, too, which seems to suggest that some careers are glamorous and exciting, while others are drab and unrewarding, is not helpful. And our education system has sometimes unhappily reinforced this in offering educational courses which are not as well aligned to job and career opportunities as they could be. In its recent inquiry into underemployment, the EET Committee heard from UK Oil and Gas that they are currently facing significant skill shortages and anticipate a demand for around 100,000 young people over the coming years. The renewables industry suggests similar shortages and a significant growing demand for younger people. This indicates the importance of the Scottish Government's collaboration with industry in initiatives such as the NIG Skills Academy, which aims to train at least 3,000 younger people in energy industry skills by 2015. Because it's not only immoral that young people are consigned to unemployment when some industries are crying out for new recruits, it's also economically inefficient and will stifle those same industries that offer the greatest prospects for growth. This indicates also the importance of modern apprenticeships, which re-establish the link between training and employment in areas where real career opportunities lie. And it is a cause for some satisfaction, although again not for complacency, that we've seen 25,000 modern apprenticeships created for the second year running. Presiding Officer, opposition members should have a care when they talk down Scotland's oil industry and when they talk down their renewable energy potential, and when they daily talk down Scotland's future economic prospects. For in doing so, they most discourage our younger folk, who deserve much better than this from Scotland's politicians across the political spectrum.
Thank you very much. I now call Claire Adamson to be followed by Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today we're asked to look at young people supporting Scotland's economy today and tomorrow, but I hope you'll indulge me, Presiding Officer, if I first turn to the past. I recently attended a National Library of Scotland exhibition on 11 notable women scientists. The curator, Catherine Booth, said of the event, most of these women are virtually unknown today, but their work is still influencing new generations of scientists. They are representative of a much bigger group of female Scottish scientists whose achievements we are proud to celebrate. If I can just mention two of the 11 women, the first one being Mary Fairfax Somerville, indeed which one of our committee rooms is named after, who was a notable mathematician and astronomer and the first woman elected to the Royal Astronomical Society, and also Wilhelmina Fleming, an astronomer who discovered one of the most beautiful visions in our heavens that I believe, that being the Horsehead Nebula, as well as many other stars. And the reason I raise these women of the past is to show that Scotland's traditions and reputation in the areas of science and technology belong as much to our young women as they do to our young men. And if we look at today, we have also notable trailblazers in this area, including Scotland's Anne Glover, who of course is the first scientific advisor to the European Commission. But it's to the future of our young people who are choosing their careers that I would like to turn to. And it's important that the skills gaps identified and already talked about by many of my colleagues today, especially in our technology markets, that young women are as informed and able to take advantages of the opportunities in these areas as are young men. The Royal Academy of Engineering forecasts that the UK will need 104,000 STEM graduates between now and 2020 to meet demand. A recent article in The Telegraph reported on the EEF report. In their article, 1 in 5 must become an engineer. And it says there that Terry Scowler at the EEF says there is no getting away from it, that women are substantially underrepresented in manufacturing at a time when industry needs to be tapping into every potential talent pool to access the skills it needs. And he goes on to say we need a huge national effort to make this happen, and government, education and industry itself all have a major role to play. And on that note, I would commend to the Parliament the work of the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology, which supports young women studying in those areas and runs out of Napier University. But there is no doubt that we need young women to recognise the potential of STEM subjects. However, the system has been described as a plumbing system that's broken, in that although we are creating very many talented women graduates, they aren't staying in the profession, and we can't continue to feed that system without fixing the leaks in the system. And the Royal Society report, Tapping All Our Talents, goes into this in some detail as to why women aren't staying in the science professions. But if we are going to actually address the barriers that are there for women, we have to get very serious about the pay gap and about the pay differential, and that women are underpaid in a lot of these areas. There has to be a fundamental change in industry and in academia to ensure that remuneration and career progression for women is fair, when the overwhelming evidence continues to point to persistent discrimination in this area. Presiding Officer, we've had a great number of briefings for this debate this afternoon, very welcome, and I know Liam McArthur mentioned a few of them in his speech this afternoon. But I'd also like to draw the attention to the University of Scotland report, Taking Pride in the Job, University Action and Graduate Employment. And Mr McIntosh mentioned he likes to see Scotland outperforming the other areas in the UK. This is indeed another area where we're outperforming, where 93% of graduates have positive destinations, the highest proportion in the UK. But the report is not complacent, and it goes on to recommend areas of good practice, including work placements, which we've talked about in some details being so important, career services and global skills. So opportunities in science and engineering are open to all young people, whatever stage of their education or training that they are at. And the modern apprenticeships offer a great opportunity, especially in the areas of the Energy Skills Academy. It's a welcome package which delivers new employer recruitment initiatives and will create over 10,000 opportunities for small and medium enterprises, as highlighted the importance by Gordon MacDonald earlier on, small and medium enterprises to recruit young people. And there will be indeed 290 modern apprenticeships in this area alone. So I think there's a lot to be very thankful for in Scotland, although we can't be complacent. I think our modern apprenticeships are showing that we are delivering for Scotland's young people, and I'm very, very happy with the movement in Scotland at this time. I would like to make a comment about some of the data in this area. There's been a lot of criticism that the data is not giving us all the information that we need. But I would highlight that in 2005 there was a NEAT workstream report by the then Scottish Executive, which highlighted in Area 11 that overall a much better understanding of the NEAT flow issues is essential. Only through this is it possible to develop a truly sophisticated and targeted policy response. The NEAT workstream has encountered significant limitations with the current information on these issues. As a result, action on improving intelligence about the group itself is one of our key recommendations. But despite that being a key recommendation, it has taken the Post-16 Education Bill to actually bring forward data sharing that will allow us actually to really have a full understanding of what is happening in this area. And I'm very disappointed that the opposition parties did not support that when the government brought it forward.
Thank you very much. I now call Ian Gray to be followed by Roderick Campbell.
Thank you. I'm always grateful to have the chance to participate in debates on youth employment, because I do believe there is no issue of greater importance which confronts us, and I'm always happy to see the Minister in her place on the front bench, since I feel I deserve a little of the credit or blame for her being there, given their appointment followed our demands for such a post some 18 months ago. And while I might have some concerns about some of our policies, I know that the title of today's debate does reflect a profound belief we share that this country's economic success and its capacity to drive social justice will be defined by the degree to which we ensure that the boundless potential of our young people is both understood and harnessed. So we should acknowledge recent improvements in the youth unemployment position, but we are obliged to rigorously examine the reality behind them. We have to follow the advice of Jack Welch and face reality as it is, not as it was or as we wish it to be. And the reality is that the annual population survey, the more reliable estimate of economic activity, as it's described in the Scottish Government's own papers, shows that for 16 to 24-year-olds last year unemployment fell, but by less than 1%. And economic inactivity in that age group actually rose by 2.5%. 33,000 16 to 19-year-olds were not in employment, education or training last year, an increase on the year before. And Kim McIntosh is right to point out that in the labour force survey itself, from which the figures in the government motion are drawn, unemployment in the 16 and 17-year-old age group is 38%. And for young men, 46% last year, a massively high figure.
Minister.
Grateful to Mr Gray. I wonder if he would accept that while the annual population survey is a larger survey base, but would he accept that the labour force survey figures are reliable, can be used and are the most recent figures? And what the annual population survey figures don't do is they don't accommodate the more recent, up-to-date, positive figures.
Ian Gray, I'll give you your time back.
Well, I think the converse of that, of course, is the annual population survey allows for blips in short-term figures to be evened out, and therefore, over the longer term, they give the more accurate figures. But my point was that these figures for 16 and 17-year-olds are from the very labour force survey that the Minister is extolling. And it reflects the reality in my own constituency. The 2012 unemployment rate for 16 to 19-year-olds is still twice the figure that it was in 2008. And between 2007 and 2012, long-term youth unemployment increased an unbelievable 15-fold in East Lothian. That's the reality. And that means, I think, that we must redouble and re-examine every measure that we take. For example, 25,000 apprenticeship starts is great, and it is absolutely right that in Scotland every one of those is attached to work. That is a good thing. But the programme bears a rather more rigorous critique than Mr Hepburn previously suggested, because 10,000 of those places going to those already in work simply undermines the capacity of that programme to address youth unemployment. Sure.
Minister.
Thank you. I'm grateful again, and I'll be brief. Mr Gray accept that it's welcome news that 77% of modern apprenticeship starts last year go to 16 to 24-year-olds. And I wonder if he could clarify whether he also accepts that under our programme that actually more modern apprenticeships are actually going to new starts now than they did under Labour. And what is his position over this 10,000? Is Labour going to commit to the 25,000 target? Or, I mean, what are you proposing?
The Minister really needs to investigate these rebuttals when her special advisers give them to her. The figure she has from the time when Labour was in power was based on an extremely small survey. But the point is this: even if that was the case, in those days long-term youth unemployment did not exist in Scotland. And the core purpose of the apprenticeship programme was to upskill those in the workforce. We are in a different situation now, and that is why those apprenticeship starts need to be used to take young people off the unemployment register. It's true, too, that too many of the 25,000 are the shorter level 2 frameworks as well. And there's not enough of a match with long-term job opportunities. Look at the oil industry. In a boom, Minister said, Mr Mackenzie said that the industry itself says they will need 100,000 young people. Yet, last year there were just 133 apprenticeships in the oil and gas framework. Surely that cannot be right. And this, of course, is the key, because employability is probably not the biggest problem right now, but rather a lack of job opportunities, demand, not supply. And that's why the government's new certificate worries me, although I accept it's been introduced with the best of intentions. There is an old Springsteen line: is a dream a lie if it don't come true, or is it something worse? What then is the certificate of work readiness in a world where there is no work ready for you, if that's not a dream which isn't going to come true? I don't accept that our young people are not fit for work, somehow from another planet. It is the economy and employers who are, for whatever reason, unavoidable or not, failing to provide opportunity for them. I know the First Minister understands the importance of the job supply, because he talked yesterday about the opportunities for young people when he welcomed 400 call centre jobs. But in the same day, the construction industry revealed that it had shed 62,500 jobs. That's why youth unemployment remains stubbornly high, and why the best thing the Scottish Government could do for our young people is to stop talking about shovel-ready projects and actually get the shovels digging. We know when it comes to work experience what works. The Community Jobs Fund, the Government's Community Job Fund, works well. Placements of reasonable length with reasonable pay and a 40% positive outcome. Why not invest more in that? Expand it into the private sector and commit to more than 1 year's funding at a time. Why not revisit the Project Scotland model, which had similar success, but for which funding was abolished back in 2007?
I must ask you to begin to conclude.
None of this is easy, nor is it unique to Scotland. Yesterday, the ILO reported on the global youth employment crisis and suggested that young people were giving up hope. All the more, then, we must redouble our efforts and re-examine every measure we take, refocus programmes like apprenticeships for today's reality, invest in demand as well as supply, and confront the long-term trends, as well as celebrate any welcome short-term improvements.
Thank you. And finally, Roderick Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When we are talking about good and bad employment statistics, it's imperative we remind ourselves at all times that the statistics in question are not just figures, they are people. Today, as we discuss young people and their contribution to the economy, I'm sure that at least most of us in the Chamber would agree that young people are probably the most important demographic of all in employment terms. What happens to them now will determine their lives and Scotland's economic strength for many, many decades to come. The Scottish Government has recognised the importance of young people and placed them at the heart of its economic strategy. Scotland was the first nation in these islands to appoint a dedicated Minister for Youth Employment and the first to launch a holistic strategy for youth employment. 25,000 modern apprenticeships must be welcomed, including the more than 1,600 in Fife. These are definitely a plus. And as Ian Gray has just said, the Community Jobs Fund is something really worthwhile. We know that youth employment is lower here and youth unemployment is lower here and youth employment is higher than the rest of the UK. Youth unemployment has fallen by 6.8% over the last year, while the UK rate fell by 0.7%. We should just have to see where that goes over the next 12 months. Then we'll be able to see just how true these statistics are. And I accept, of course, that the rise in the number of claimants over 12 months is a matter of concern. But as the Minister for Youth Employment said in the foreword to Scotland's youth employment strategy, this is no time for complacency. That must be right. And there remains much to do. New initiatives are always needed, such as the new links between universities and small and medium enterprises, and the proposed youth guarantee. And I listened with interest to what the Minister said about that earlier in the debate. It's right that we recognise the problems that long-term unemployment cause for young people. This is a problem throughout Europe, and we need to avoid creating a lost generation. Presiding Officer, the UK is the fourth most unequal country in the developed world. We also know that a key causal factor of inequality is high unemployment. There is no doubt that in Scotland, as a small, adaptable, more equal European nation, we could go further in the right direction and certainly aspire to have the lower rates of youth unemployment in Europe that some of our neighbours have. Even then, they're quite high. Denmark at 14.2% and Norway currently at 9.7%. To look at the Norwegian example more closely, the Minister for Education, Kristin Halvorsen, has repeatedly identified one of the key reasons Norway's youth employment is so low, relatively. The Norwegian government has managed to maintain low dropout rates from secondary school. Scotland's secondary, further and higher education sections clearly differ from that of Norway, as do the ages of young people in our two nations commencing these various stages of education. However, as often is the case, there is no doubt that we can learn from the country which the UN has described as the best country to live in the world. We take for granted that low youth unemployment and high employment are good things. Having a paying job, particularly one that is matched to one's skills, is certainly a good thing for a young person, but it is also of immeasurable benefit to society as a whole. The more young people we have working, the more we develop a strong, confident, skilled and experienced workforce. That in turn helps to build and maintain a vibrant, diverse and strong economy. We therefore need to do absolutely all we can to help young people get a good start on the career ladder. However, that's no small task. Each one of us in the chamber will know of at least one person, family member, constituent, who has hit an invisible brick wall. Quote, I can't get the job because I lack experience, and I can't gain experience because I can't get a job. Those frustrating words are uttered all too often by the younger generation. I'm therefore pleased that the Scottish Government has introduced the new employer-assessed Certificate of Work Readiness qualification. This will at least go some way to helping young people break out of the experience versus work cycle by offering a meaningful record of employability, even when their employer for that period cannot offer a more permanent position. And clearly that's obviously a disadvantage, but it's certainly better than nothing. In moving this forward, we're certainly fulfilling a key aim of the Scottish Government Skills for Scotland skills strategy, and which will, of course, also help companies to provide work experience, the new certificate. A structured template for the process with tangible results, hopefully, will certainly make offering placements less complicated, because there will be generally an accepted procedure for this throughout the country. Testament to the importance of this is the welcome the scheme has had from business. CBI Scotland, Federation of Small Businesses Scotland and the Scottish Council for Development and Industry and many others have expressed support for this. Presiding Officer, as I and others have said previously, there is no room for complacency. Despite Scotland's advantage over the UK, youth unemployment still remains much, much higher than any of us would like it to be. But as Norway, Denmark and the Netherlands show, wealthy countries like Scotland don't have to suffer from very high youth unemployment, even in times like these. With the right strategies, we can do better. With the powers currently held elsewhere, the Government and this Parliament could do better still and deliver more for the young people of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, that now brings us to the closing speeches. And I call on Mary Scanlon, 7 minutes, and we still have a small amount of time in hand for interventions.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am very pleased to wind up in this debate, which has been mainly constructive. I hope that the Government will respond to the very positive call for 3 years funding for training contracts raised by Margaret McCulloch. And I would also say Ken Macintosh in his speech raised the inactivity rate, and that is something that I think we shouldn't lose sight of, particularly given the inactivity rose by 12,000 in the last 12 months of last year in Scotland, compared to 2,000 in the rest of the UK. And I hope I can get an answer, an explanation for that in the summing up. I would also suggest that Mike Mackenzie amend his critical speech in light of contributions from opposition parties, because quite honestly I didn't hear anyone being grudging. In fact, I think we've all been very fulsome in our praise and welcome the reduction in youth unemployment, and I will continue to do the same. I look forward to the Government wind-up speech. Given that in previous debates I've asked the Minister several questions and got no answers, in another debate I got answers to questions I hadn't asked, and in the previous debate I was told that my figures were all wrong, and then I got a letter from the Minister to say that they were right. So I hope today we can get on to a much better understanding and footing, because I think this issue is so important and we certainly want to work with the Government on the issue. So can I say again, we very much welcome the drop in youth unemployment by 29,000 over the last year, and as others have said, we commend the many employers who have helped to achieve this reduction. The inactivity rate has also fallen by 1,000, as I've said, over the same period, and much more in the UK. But it's also the case that 45% of 16 to 20-year-olds were enrolled in full-time education in Scotland, 2% higher than the UK, and excluding those in full-time education, the unemployment rate in Scotland is 21.4 compared to 19.3 in the UK. These figures change quarterly and annually, but the figures are comparable to the UK, and we welcome young people getting the opportunity to enter the routine of work and a career. Before going on to speak about the Certificate of Work Readiness, I would like to highlight that over the past year there was no change for unemployment in 50 to 64-year-olds, and unemployment in other age groups increased. So whilst we wholeheartedly, fulsomely welcome the reduction of 29% for youth unemployment over the past year, it is disappointing that unemployment has increased in 24 to 50-year-olds and stood still for 50 to 64-year-olds. So we would welcome debates on employment for people of all ages, and even particularly for women trying to get back into work after a break for children. The CIPD research report last month highlighted the jobs mismatch, as the Minister said, between employers and young people. They state that employer feedback is crucial for young people, a point also raised by Roderick Campbell. Yet it is something employers struggle to provide, particularly during recruitment. There has also been criticism of the need for soft skills and ability to work in a team from employers with regard to young people. The Certificate of Work Readiness, developed in partnership with business, does help to bridge this gap. With college-based learning time, 190 hours of real-life work experience, and awarded only following employer assessment, this is essential and I have no doubt will be positively useful in seeking work. This certificate, approved by the Scottish Qualifications Agency, backed by industry, employer bodies and companies such as Diageo and Scottish Power, is a positive and a progressive step to the job market, and I hope that many other employers will work together with education and further education colleges in order to help increase the number of these certificates. In previous debates, I've raised the issue of jobs in the hospitality industry, and I would like to take this opportunity to commend Apex Hotels, who regularly take part in initiatives to promote a more positive image for the catering and hospitality industry. Apex recently held a jobs fair for 3rd, 4th and 5th year students to highlight the wide range of different jobs and career paths in this business. This initiative was also highlighted in the CIPD research report. But I think one of the things we keep talking about apprenticeships as if they come from nowhere and we just want to get them into jobs. And I think Liz Smith made a critical point about let's look at this joined-up journey. And, you know, whatever job they go into, whatever training they need, whatever education they need, and whatever certificate of work readiness, it's all helped enormously, and it so much depends on the basic skills in literacy and numeracy in primary schools. So let's not all talk about how many hires people have got. Let's make sure they've got what they need in primary schools before moving on to secondary. So modern apprenticeships and reductions in youth unemployment should also go hand in hand with training and understanding of entrepreneurship. The Carnegie Trust briefing paper for this debate highlights the need for the Scottish Government to work with schools, colleges and universities to eradicate interruptions and inconsistencies in their approach to enterprise, to ensure that students' enterprise awareness is reinforced at each level rather than weakened, a point raised by Liam MacArthur. So finally, Deputy Presiding Officer, I would also like to commend the Institute of Civil Engineers for giving free student registrations with the Institute for all apprentices, all apprenticeships at college. This is another good example of a good partnership between the industry and our further education colleges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I move on, can I just say to members that, as members know, if they've participated in the debate, they really should be in the chamber for closing speeches. Otherwise, it's discourteous to the chamber. I'm therefore disappointed to note that Mark MacDonald has not returned yet for closing speeches. I now call on Ken Macintosh. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And like Mary Scanlon, I think that I would acknowledge it's been quite a good-natured, relatively good-natured debate, consensual debate, and been some good contributions from all. I thought Liz Smith and Ian Gray both opened in the right tone, recognising that we all view this subject with tremendous importance and that there is a shared agenda here to tackle youth employment across Scotland. I thought there were also a number of very strong individual contributions. Patricia Ferguson's example of what's been happening in Royston at work and the fact that DWP rules are still working against young people claiming benefits need to be examined and a chance for joint working to be put into practice. I was also particularly impressed or intrigued by Claire Adamson's reference to the Horsehead Nebula. So I think most of us will be round to our computers later to have a little look at what that exactly looks like. But also the horsehead. It looks like a horsehead, yes. Thank you very much. Yes. I suspect when it's done in starlight, it's a little bit more glamorous than that. You know. I think the Al Capone books that my colleagues have been reading have a different reference. But also the acknowledgement that Claire Adamson had to the inequality that women still have in the workforce and the difficulties we have in tackling segregation were important. There were a number of references to, I wouldn't say it was a statistical battlefield, but a number of contributors talked about the merits and demerits of different statistics, including, just number here, I think we had Jane Baxter, Jamie Hepburn, Liam MacArthur, Rod Campbell, Ian Gray, and in fact Ian Gray and Stuart Stevenson I thought were very helpful in explaining the difference between the Labour Force survey and the annual survey. And I think, like Mary Scanlon, with the honourable exception of Mike Mackenzie, I thought most people did come to a balanced view about the strengths and weaknesses of different statistical approaches. But perhaps, I won't, if you don't mind, Mr Mackenzie, I won't. I did take an intervention earlier from Mr Mackenzie, so I don't feel guilty in this case. But I thought the most constructive or the most important part of the debate were when we talked about the different programmes that have been put in place both regionally and nationally, because effectively that's, I think, what we're all looking to examine, to see which programmes have been effective, which are working, what what are the reasons basically behind the fall in unemployment we're seeing now, and therefore where could we invest further sums of money and political energy? The apprenticeship programme, again, that was raised by a number of speakers, and just to preface my remarks, I think all the Labour Party speakers welcome the apprenticeship programme. In fact, a bit like the Minister's Cabinet position, we feel that we take credit for this, that the only reason that there are such large targets is because we pushed for it. But we also, and so we welcome the 25,000 target and the fact the government make that. But we think there are weaknesses, and I thought that Ian Gray and a number of speakers talked about that fact that the fact that 10,000 of these apprentices are already in jobs means that although it's a very helpful programme in upskilling and offering training, it's not by itself tackling employment itself. And I'll take the Minister.
Minister, I'll be really brief. Do Labour want to stop the modern apprenticeship programme for over 25s, and do you want to stop the modern apprenticeship programme for those who are already in work?
I can compensate slightly for the intervention.
No.
Ken Macintosh.
No to both questions. The key about what I'm trying to say about the modern apprenticeship programme is it is good, but it could be improved and it could be better. It has weaknesses. The fact that 10,000 people are already in work is a weakness. The fact that many of the people on apprenticeship programmes are now level 2 rather than level 3 is a weakness. The fact that I think £1,000 per apprentice is spent by the government is a weakness of the system. So I'm just pointing out that the apprenticeship programme is a very good programme which could be improved and could offer more, and it isn't the way to address employment by itself. It's a way to improve training and education, but not necessarily simply to address employment. A number of speakers also, Jean Baxter and I think Margaret McCulloch in particular, raised wage subsidy programmes and the success of wage subsidy programmes, the previous Labour's Future Jobs Fund, but the current Community Jobs Fund, which has been very successful, achieving a 40% permanent job retention record for its participants. And before I go on to that, because this was raised, I think, by Margaret McCulloch and others, and I think by Ian Gray, we had a debate just last week, a consensual debate about the importance of 3-year funding, and in which we talked about the agreement, the joint agreement between government, local authorities and the SEVO and the voluntary sector about securing 3-year funding. But here we have a very good example of a fund which should be supported over 3 years with some certainty, and it would improve. I don't think there's any doubt that it would actually improve the success of the CGS scheme if they had that certainty. And much as Margaret raised the difficulty that training providers have, I think that if the government was to translate its talk and debates just last week into action, they would certainly get our support on that. And we have pushed repeatedly over many years for further support for wage subsidy programmes. And we were delighted last September when the Cabinet Secretary announced the Employer Recruitment Initiative. But it's disappointing that we're now in May and we've yet to see any details. Now, my latest understanding of this is that the subsidy will be £1,500 and that will be provided. Well, perhaps the Minister can expand on this, because we are now, as I say, we're now in May, 6 months on from the announcement. We still don't know how much it will be. £1,500 is a long way short of the £6,000 that was offered through Labour's Future Jobs Fund. And I think that at the very least we should have some debate in the Parliament about this very important matter, which would make a concrete difference. We know these programmes do work. And there are many other steps we could take, specific actions we could take, for example, to improve entrepreneurial activity in Scotland. I'll just give you one example. Denmark, for example, encourage unemployed people to start up their own business. And as much as the government do without reinventing the wheel, Scotland at the moment underperforms relative to the UK on entrepreneurial activity, and the UK in turn underperforms relative to adjacent European countries. But we have examples such as the University of the Highlands and Islands has a programme called Creative Business, which has been very successful. Mark MacDonald mentioned the Prince's Trust earlier, and that's in a different context, but that's a project, voluntary sector provider with a very good record in promoting entrepreneurial activity. And there are other fantastic schemes. The Entrepreneurial Spark, supported by businessmen like Willie Hawkey in Glasgow, have been very successful. But it's notable, for example, that programme has 3 offices in Scotland, but it doesn't have an office in Dundee, in Aberdeen or Inverness. So I think the government could do more to build on the success of these programmes and support them. a number of speakers brought up the numbers in education, employment and training. The Youth Guarantee Scheme, Opportunities for All, again, it's a good programme as far as it goes, but we can see it's not actually reducing the numbers. So I think we have to re-examine this and perhaps look at extending that programme to 25 or to 30. So, and within Scotland, I don't want to go back to unemployment statistics too much, but there's a clear issue here that if we were just to improve all the regions of Scotland to the standard of employment in the best region, that would make a huge difference by itself. Over this last year, for example, the unemployment rate has decreased in 19 local authority areas, but it's gone up in 12 of them, with no change in only one. Many members here, several members, I think Mark MacDonald, Kevin Stewart, Stephen Stevenson, Jane Baxter, Jenny Mara, all talked about regional good examples in the regions, and in particular in Aberdeen and the North East, where the oil economy is booming, unemployment is low, admittedly, several people said with pockets of deprivation. But we know that in Lanarkshire, Renfrewshire, Ayrshire and elsewhere, there are whole communities are being debilitated by joblessness. And surely there's more we can do simply in the way of affordable transport. I actually thought at one point that we were going to get consensus breaking out between Kevin Stewart and Jenny Mara about this issue. I was disappointed. I welcomed Kevin Stewart's contribution, but I was disappointed he didn't take the intervention from Ian Gray, because I think it was going to offer him the opportunity to back the regulation of bus bill. And I'd happy to take an intervention now if he wants to come in just to offer his support for that measure.
Actually, you're just finishing. There's not a lot of time left.
Okay, Presiding Officer, I'm conscious of my time. So it has been a consensual debate. I think we need to focus on what works. We do welcome any improvement in employment statistics. There are some programmes which are making a difference, but it would be good to know exactly what difference they make, what difference they are particularly making to youth unemployment, and what more we can do to tackle this particularly intractable issue of long-term youth unemployment, which is clearly heading in totally the wrong way. So we may not have been agreed on these market interventions, but I hope we can unite today on the importance of helping our young people and to emphasise that we are here to help and not to blame them.
Thank you very much. And finally, I call on Angela Constance to wind up the debate. Minister, you have 10 minutes till 5 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I say I'm grateful to all members who have participated in this debate this afternoon. I know it may not always feel like it for individual members, but contributions across the political spectrum always do influence government thinking and subsequent action. And over the past 12 to 18 months, many members from across Parliament have made significant helpful contributions with respect to issues such as long-term unemployment, additional support needs, women, what happens to ex-industrial communities and other issues like rural skills. All issues that we are incorporating into our strategy and our day-to-day work. Can also put on record my thanks to MSPs, again across the political divide, who undertake a lot of local activity in their constituencies to support both young people and employers and do everything that they can at a local level to boost youth employment. I am often invited by members to meet with many local organisations, attend youth jobs fairs and to meet to discuss a variety of matters. And I'm always more than happy to do my best, diary permitting, to accommodate members from across the political divide. And I'm glad that SNP MSPs and indeed Labour MSPs take full advantage of that. Although I do have to say I have never as yet received a request to support any sectoral events or local activity from the Tory or Liberal benches. I'm just saying. With regards to yes,
Liam McCarthy.
I'm grateful to the Minister for taking an intervention. She may want to check with her private office, but I think further to not the last debate, but the debate before that, I was in touch about the organisation of a local event and sought more details from her office about how that might be achieved. I just invite her maybe to correct the record.
Minister.
I'll indeed check with my private office Mr MacArthur, and of course I'm always open to invitations to come to Orkney, and indeed last year I visited Skills Development Scotland in Orkney. Can I say to Patricia Ferguson, she made a really good case of the sterling work with regards to Royston at work. I, with other local members, attended and visited Royston at work. It is, to me, an example as to why you should never abandon welfare powers with Westminster. But laying that political difference aside, I am, of course, more than happy to meet with Ms Ferguson, Royston and Work and any other to discuss. I'm not going to make any promises, but I will give an undertaking to do my best to look for a solution. And in that vein, Presiding Officer, I'm also happy to accept Mr MacDonald's kind invitation to the Young Scotland Has Talent event in Aberdeen. As Ken McIntosh said, we've had an exploration of the labour market stats, and of course we all have to recognise that there are a variety of stats, and they are indeed complex, and we all have to strive to really get into the guts of the figures to understand as best we can what's working, what's not working, and the trends ahead. But I hope and I welcome the fact that members seem to agree that in terms of youth unemployment it is indeed falling and that it's going in the right direction. And I wish to emphasise the positive, Presiding Officer, that we do indeed have nearly 30,000 less young unemployed Scots now than we did have than this time last year, and that youth unemployment is at its lowest in 3 years. And I make that point not to be in any way complacent, because, Presiding Officer, I have many faults, too many to list here this afternoon, but complacency is most certainly not one of them. But the reason that we must emphasise the positives, because we need to use the positive movement in these figures to increase our resolve to do more. Now is most certainly not the time for us to take our foot off the gas. And there's a real opportunity for us all to grasp and to use the positive movement, the positive drop in youth unemployment, to use that positivity to persuade more employers that they can and do make a difference, and that our young people have an invaluable contribution to make to the economy. I do also think it's important to acknowledge that Scotland is outperforming the rest of the UK with higher employment, lower unemployment and better inactivity levels. Again, that is not to be any way complacent. But I think it's important to acknowledge that Scottish employers are actually more likely to recruit young people, and again that's evidenced by the UK Commission on Employability and Skills. And I also believe that it evidences the distinctive Scottish Government policies that they are having the right impact, whether that's the Modern Apprenticeship Programme, Opportunities for All, reforms in colleges, or the modernisation of the Careers Programme. But let me also be clear that the limit of my ambition is not just to have better youth employment stats than the UK, because I look at other European countries both large and small, that despite a global economic recession have youth unemployment rates of less than 10%. And that's where our ambition needs to be. And I very much regret that as yet the UK Government are not supportive of the European Youth Guarantee. And we will do everything that we can, Mr McIntosh, within the powers that we do have. I think Community Jobs Scotland and the Employer Recruitment Incentive, which is the most ambitious employer recruitment incentive wage subsidy programme anywhere in the UK at present, and that will create up to 10,000 jobs. And one of the tasks that I hope to be very imminently completing is signing off grant letters to local authorities so they can be out there supporting small and medium-sized businesses in their local areas and getting young people into work. So please be reassured that £25 million Scottish Government and European money is going to be well spent, and it will be done in partnership with local authorities and small to medium-sized businesses, with a view to making a difference to our young people. Presiding Officer, the challenge of youth unemployment is compounded by an economic downturn and structural changes to the labour market. To address the economic downturn, we do indeed need to reinvigorate the economy. We need economic growth, and with that regards, quite simply, I would prefer to have a Parliament with a full range of powers as opposed to a Parliament with limited powers. And with regards to the structural changes in the labour market, we know that there are less entry-level jobs for young people. We know that word of mouth is still the #1 form of recruitment, and that disadvantages young people. And we know that young people are held back not because of their lack of qualifications or their lack of talent, but because of their lack of experience, and their only crime is that they are young. So we therefore do need to ask companies, large and small, to have youth policies, policies where people are going the extra mile to recruit young people. And the small, medium-sized companies are our untapped potential, hence the importance of the employer recruitment incentive that will be delivered very, very soon. But we ourselves, as well as making our ask of employers, we need to change. We need to change how we deliver education, skills and training in this country. And that's what the reform of colleges and the modernisation of careers is about. And we, of course, have achieved good outcomes with more young people in full-time college courses, higher retention and higher completion rates, and that will improve job prospects. But the outcomes of education isn't in itself a qualification. The outcome for any education system is jobs, and whether our young people are in part-time jobs, full-time jobs or well-paid work. And in that regard, it's not about the length of courses, it is about the content of courses and the connectivity between the world of work and the world of education. Presiding Officer, I will just finally say that I welcome the change in tone from the Labour benches, although I've often been more concerned that their focus has been on knocking down solutions as opposed to building them up. And I want to end with the words of Harry Burns. Harry Burns often talks about how we all have to take the responsibility to nurture very young children and treasure babies. Well, similarly, Presiding Officer, we all have a responsibility to ensure our young people are supported, guided and nurtured and enabled to spread their wings and to become independent in the place of work. And what I want to do, and what this government wants to do, is instead of giving them one helping hand, is to be able to help them with both hands. And that's what the powers of independence is all about. It's using everything at our disposal, absolutely everything, from tax, from welfare. And I call again on those who wish to abandon powers with Westminster to think again. That's not in the interest of our young people.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate on motion number S4M 06492 on young people supporting Scotland's economy today and tomorrow, and it's now time to move on to decision time. There are two questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that amendment number S4M 06492.2 in the name of Ken Macintosh, which seeks to amend motion number S4M 06492 in the name of Angela Constance on young people supporting Scotland's economy today and tomorrow, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed, and therefore we will move to a vote. Members should please cast their votes now. Order. The result of the vote on amendment number 6492.2 in the name of Ken Macintosh is yes 44, no 61. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The second question is that motion S4M 06492 in the name of Angela Constance on young people supporting Scotland's economy today and tomorrow be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is therefore agreed. That concludes decision time, and I now close this meeting.